than a year, Amy suffered from excruciating headaches.
I was getting to the point after a few months where the migraines were just all day, every day, 24 hours a day. I had stopped having, menstrual cycle too, which had stopped, and that was going on for months. It just got worse and worse, and the migraines were worse, and I just kept working, and then I'd go home at night, and as soon as I could, I would just go to bed, close the blinds, put pillows over my head, and just hold my head. And sometimes I'd be screaming, just wishing that I could literally just take my head off my shoulders because the pain was so bad.
Over the next 18 months, Amy was referred to a migraine specialist, an OBGYN, and an eye doctor. But the only diagnosis she received was depression and anxiety.
So I went back to my physician and I said, nothing's working. And I was just crying and crying beside myself. And I put my head down, in tears, and I had looked up for a minute, and she was checking her watch.
Dr. Calvi diagnosed Amy's problem as prolactinoma.
But then he also noted his vision continued to deteriorate, and he was subsequently diagnosed with loss of his peripheral vision on some formal visual testing.
4 months ago, I was noticing visual blurring in my left eye. After going to several eye doctors, I had visual fields done, and they showed an abnormality in the superior temporal visual field bilaterally, and that's pretty indicative of a problem in the pituitary area.
The things that I discovered when I went to Johns Hopkins was that I was losing sight on my left eye, and I didn't even know that. I was losing the peripheral vision on my left eye.
Because he had a compression of his optic nerves, he had already some vision damage.
He said, maybe it's the pituitary gland, but I'm not sure, why don't you do an MRI? When the MRI results came back, he called me and he said, listen, it's bad. It's not only do you have a tumor, he said, what you have in centimeters, I've never seen in my life as a doctor in millimeters.
TSH-secreting tumors are very rare. They represent less than 1% of all pituitary tumors.
My hands seem to be bending in ways they shouldn't be. And at first I thought, I'm getting older, and this happens when you're getting older. But then one day at work there was a blood drive, and I was going to donate blood, but they told me I couldn't because I had high blood pressure. So I went to a doctor, a primary care that I found. She looked at me and she thought that I had acromegaly. So then we went for an MRI, and sure enough.
Welcome to the Chemical Pathology lecture. Today we are going to study laboratory diagnosis of pituitary gland diseases. Let's take a look to our topics. Number 1, history and introduction to pituitary gland. Number 2, pituitary tumors. Number 3, growth hormone excess, gigantism, and acromegaly. Number 4, growth hormone deficiency. Number 5, hyperprolactinemia. Number 6, Simon disease and Sheehan syndrome. Number 7, empty sella syndrome. Number 8, diabetes insipidus. And number 9, syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. The objective of this lecture is to describe the laboratory diagnosis of pituitary gland diseases. In the history, Galen, the Greek physician Galen, was the first man known to describe the pituitary gland as part of a group of secretory organs for the excretion of nasal mucus. while the anatomist Andreas Vesalius was the man who first used the name pituitary gland. And finally, the anatomist Samuel Thomas von Sommering coined the name hypophysis, that means appendix cerebri. The first intimation about the internal secretion of the gland was given by Bourdieu in 1835, but was Brown-Séquard, who furnished a theory that cells of the gland secretes a substance that might influence other cells independently of the nervous system. And in the year 1884, Fritzsche and Klebs registered an enlargement of the pituitary body in a case of giantism, and also Minkowski in the year 1884 also suggested that the pituitary might be related with acromegaly. By the other hand, the German pathologist Morris Simons described it by first time in 1914 a female patient with chronic pituitary failure, and the German Medical Society recommended in 1939 to call hypopituitarism a Simon disease. By the other hand, the English pathologist Harold Lemming Sheehan described it in 1937 Sheehan syndrome. The pituitary gland, or hypophysis, is an endocrine gland about the size of a pea. Measures in her anteroposterior diameter 8 millimeters. In the vertical diameter has 6 millimeters, and in the transverse diameter has 12 millimeters, and weighs approximately 0.6 grams, more or less 600 milligrams. The pituitary gland is located within the sella turcica, in the sphenoid bone, in the middle cranial fossa. The pituitary gland is connected by the infundibular stalk to the median eminence of the hypothalamus, and is also covered by a dural fold called diaphragma sella. Anterior pituitary, or adenohypophysis, and also the intermediate lobe derives from the ectoderm. Specifically, both of them arises from a protrusion of the pharynx that is called Radke's pouch, and when it loses the connection, forms anterior pituitary and also the intermediate lobe, as we are going to see later. We need to know also in this moment that the intermediate lobe synthesizes and secretes melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH. And by the other hand, posterior pituitary, or neurohypophysis, develops as an extension of the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland, or hypophysis, is the mix of two tissues: a finger of ectoderm that grows from the roof of the mouth, a protrusion called Radke's pouch that is going to give origin to anterior pituitary, and also is going to give origin to the intermediate lobe. And also another protrusion, this one of ectodermal origin, that derives from an invagination that derives ventrally from the encephalon, and is going to give origin to posterior pituitary. Adenohypophysis has the following portions: pars distalis, pars tuberalis, and pars intermedia. Let's see these portions. pars distalis of adenohypophysis is the largest section and constitutes about 80% of the whole gland. Pars tuberalis is no more than a collar of tissue that surrounds the infundibular stalk, and the pars intermedia refers to the intermediate lobe. By the other hand, neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary is composed of bundles of axons from the hypothalamic neurosecretory neurons intermixed with glial cells and has the following portions: pars nervosa, the infundibular stalk, and the median eminence. The pars nervosa represents the bulk of the posterior pituitary. Here we have the infundibular stalk that connects the pars nervosa with the base of the brain, and here we can see also the median eminence. As we can see, in the hypothalamus area, we are going to have neurons, some of them with a short axon that is going to be called parvocellular neurosecretory cells. They are going to be called parvocellular neurosecretory cells, and they are going to produce and release the hypothalamic releasing hormones that are going to arrive to anterior pituitary cells using a special vascular communication. And this vascular communication between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland is going to be called the hypothalamus hypophyseal portal system. We are going to have also neurons with long axons, and they are going to be called magnocellular neurosecretory cells. Okay? And the axons that come from hypothalamus, specifically from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei, these neurons with these long axons are going to enter in the posterior pituitary gland. It is important to know also that microscopic examination of anterior pituitary gland reveals three cell types: acidophils, basophils, and chromophobes cells, as we are going to see later. Pars distalis of adenohypophysis or anterior pituitary gland is composed of epithelial cells that we are watching here, surrounded by vascular sinusoids, as we can see. When the tissue is stained with hematoxylin and eosin, three distinct types of cells are seen: acidophils with orange to red cytoplasm. These cells produce and contain polypeptide hormones and include the following population of cells: somatotrope cells that produce growth hormone and lactotrope cells that produce prolactin. Basophil cells with a blue cytoplasm. These cells contain glucoprotein hormones, and they include the following population of cells: the corticotrope cells that produce proopiomelanocortin that finally give origin to adrenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH. Include also thyrotrope cells that produce TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone, and finally include gonadotrope cells that produce FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and also LH, luteinizing hormone, gonadotrophins. And finally we have the cell group of chromophobe cells with a cytoplasm that stains very poorly. Cells with a cytoplasm that stains very poorly. These are cells with minimal or no hormonal content, because some are stem cells that have not yet differentiated into hormone-producing cells, or some of them may be acidophils or basophil cells degranulated or depleted of hormones. We can see here also the intermediate lobe that is very small in humans and contains large paired cells that produce melanocyte-stimulating hormone, or MSH. And we are watching here also posterior pituitary formed by a lot of axons that comes from magnocellular neurosecretory cells from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus. We can also see here glia cells or neurolia. Neurolia or glia cells are non-neuronal cells that form myelin and provide support and protection for neurons. In fact, glia cells surround neurons and hold them in place, supply nutrients and oxygen to neurons, and also destroy pathogens and remove dead neurons and form myelin. It is very important that you remember that anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis contains the population of acidophil cells, and acidophil cells produce polypeptide hormones and include the following population of cells: somatotrope cells, which secrete growth hormone and represents between 30 to 40% of all the cells present in adenohypophysis. Also, acidophil cells include the population of lactotrope cells, which secrete prolactin and represents between 3 to 5% of all the cells of adenohypophysis. Also, anterior pituitary contains the population of basophil cells that, as we said previously, produce glycoprotein hormones and include the following population of corticotrope cells, which secrete proopiomelanocortin, which is cleavage within the pituitary gland to form adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, and many others. And corticotrope's population of cells represents 20% of all the cells present in the anterior pituitary. Basophil cells also include thyrotrope cells, which secrete thyroid-stimulating hormone, and thyrotrope cells represents between 3 to 5% of all the cells. And finally, basophil cells include gonadotrope cells, which secrete follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH, and gonadotrope cells represents between 3 to 5% of all the cells present in anterior pituitary. We are going to start to study now pituitary tumors. The first thing that we need to know about pituitary tumors is the classification. Pituitary tumors may be classified according to the size in the greatest diameter in microadenomas, that refers to pituitary tumors with less than 1 centimeter, and macroadenomas, that refers to pituitary tumors with equal or more than 1 centimeter. They also can be classified according to functioning. They can be secretory, as occurs in 70% of the cases, and they can be of lactotrope cells with a frequency of occurrence of 30% producing prolactin. They can be also of somatotrope cells, as occur in 15% of the cases, and they produce growth hormone. They can be also of corticotrope cells, as occurs also in 15% of the cases, and they produce adrenocorticotropic hormone. In fact, the pituitary adenoma producer of adrenocorticotropic hormone gives origin to Cushing disease. They can be also of combined cells with production of growth hormone and prolactin, as occurs in 8% of the cases, and they can be of thyrotrope cells, as occurs in 1% of the cases, and they produce thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. They can be also non-secretory or non-functioning, as occurs in the rest 30% of the cases. The clinical picture of the pituitary tumors depends on the oversecretion of the particular hormone, also depend on the compression of other cells within the pituitary, leading to hormonal deficiency, and finally depend on compression of near structures. For example, can compress the optic chiasm, resulting in visual field defects, of which bitemporal hemianopia or bitemporal hemianopsia is the most frequent presentation. Can also lead to hydrocephalus due to obstruction of the third ventricle. We need to remember that all these pituitary tumors can produce the increased intracranial pressure syndrome that include headache, vomiting mainly without nausea, papilledema, and bradycardia. And remember that papilledema refers to optic disc swelling caused by an increased intracranial pressure due to any cause. To be able to understand the different visual field defects produced by pituitary tumors, the first that you need to do is to learn the different components of the via optica. Everything starts with the eyeball of each eye, left and right. Then the visual information travels through the retina using the optic nerves, passing the optic chiasm, continuing through the optic tract, and arriving to the geniculate nucleus. After this, visual information will use the geniculocalcarine tract, also called as optic radiation, arriving to the calcarine fissure in the occipital lobe, where the visual processing center is present. Then, in simple terms, if you want to understand these visual defects, for example, take into account, imagine that you are watching these numbers now, number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. In this moment, these numbers are part of your visual field, of your visual fields. Okay? Then, to be able to register the information of number 1, you will use these black fibers. Okay? The black fibers will use this way and then cross to the other side. And to be able to receive the information related with number 3, you will use also these black fibers. Okay? But these black fibers will continue by the same side. To be able to register the information related with number 2, you will use the red fibers. And this red fiber will continue by the same side. And to be able to receive the information related with number 4, you will use also the red fiber, but this one will cross to the other side also. In this moment, I want to be very clear, because I am going to paint the area of the optic chiasm. Precisely in this area, this is the area of the optic chiasm. Imagine that in this area you have a pituitary tumor compressing these fibers, compressing the black fibers related with number 1 and compressing these red fibers related with number 4. Precisely when you have a pituitary tumor compressing these fibers of the optic nerves at the level of the optic chiasm, you will have a visual field defect that is called bilateral hemianopsia or bilateral hemianopia. Precisely in bilateral hemianopsia, vision is missing in the outer half of both visual fields. Okay, vision is missing in the outer half of both visual fields, and this can be due to pituitary tumors compressing the optic fibers at the level of the optic chiasm, or can be also due to strokes, trauma, infection, or neurosurgery affecting these fibers at this level. But you can have also other types of visual defects. For example, imagine that you have a problem at the level of your optic nerves before the optic chiasm. In this case, you will lose the vision of the affected eyes. Okay? And for example, you can have problem also after the optic chiasm, for example, at the level of the optic tract or even at the level of the calcarine fissure. And in this case, you will lose the vision of the outer side of the outer zone of one eye and of the inner zone of the other eyes. Okay? Now we are going to talk about growth hormone or GH. Growth hormone is a single chain polypeptide of 191 amino acids, and the genes with the information for the synthesis of these hormones are present in the long arm of chromosome 17. GH or growth hormone is synthesized, stored, and secreted by the somatotrope cells of the pituitary gland in response to the secretion of the growth hormone releasing hormone by the hypothalamus. By the other hand, somatostatin is produced also by the hypothalamus in the paraventricular and also in the arcuate nuclei, but inhibits growth hormone release and also inhibits TSH secretion, inhibits thyroid stimulating hormone secretion by the pituitary gland. Although exists evidence of direct action of growth hormone on long bones growth in children, most of its anabolic and metabolic actions are mediated through an intermediary, the insulin-like growth factor 1, also called somatumidin C. The insulin-like growth factor 1 is synthesized mainly in the liver in response to the stimulation of growth hormone. Insulin-like growth factor 1 circulates in the blood linked to the insulin-like growth factor binding protein. As with all hormones, it is the free, unbound form, the one that is biologically active. The insulin-like growth factor 1 negatively feedback on the pituitary gland to inhibit growth hormone secretion. As we were saying, somatostatin is synthesized and released by the arcuate and paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus, and somatostatin is going to inhibit the production and the secretion of a growth hormone by the somatotrope cells, and also somatostatin will inhibit the production and the secretion of thyroid stimulating hormone TSH by thyrotrope cells in the anterior pituitary. Also, we saw that growth hormone releasing hormone also produced by the parvocellular neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus will increase the production and the secretion of growth hormone by the somatotrope cells. once growth hormone is in the blood, will arrive to the liver, and once in the liver, growth hormone will stimulate liver production in order that liver synthesize the insulin-like growth factor 1, also known as somatomedin C. And this final product will mediate all the metabolic effects of growth hormone. And these metabolic effects are the following and are related with proteins. For example, in relation with proteins, will increase protein synthesis. In relation with lipids, will increase fat catabolism, increasing lipolysis. In relation with carbohydrates, will decrease insulin sensitivity, leading to hyperglycemia. In relation with bones and muscles, will activate osteoblasts and chondrocytes, increasing bone synthesis and also muscle growth. And in relation with the different organs, will increase organ growth. In this moment, we need to know also that growth hormone exhibits a steady decline with increasing age. Growth hormone has the following basal values: less than 5 nanogram per ml and usually less than 1 nanogram per ml, with pulsatile peaks between 10 to 20 nanograms per ml, and with a half-life between 10 to 20 minutes. Also, it's known that growth hormone may increase bone synthesis and mineralization of bones through the mitogen activating protein kinases and the extracellular signal regulated kinases pathway. Also, by the other hand, the insulin-like growth factor 1, also known as somatomedin C, acts through the JAK-STAT signaling pathway. JAK refers to Janus kinase and STAT refers to an activator of transcription proteins. This insulin-like growth factor 1 has a half-life between 18 to 20 hours, and the reference values are the following. For patients with 17 or less years old, between 15 and 650 nanograms per ml. For patients between 18 and 90 years old, between 35 and 530 nanograms per ml. Although you need to remember that these reference values varies according to age and sex. Serum growth hormone. Growth hormone, also known as somatotropin. Serum growth hormone is undetectable for most of the day in healthy, non-stressed individuals. Growth hormone is secreted in a pulsatile fashion due to many stimuli. The stimuli that increase growth hormone secretion are the following: deep sleep. In fact, up to 70% of growth hormone secretion occurs during stage 4 flow wave sleep. Major stress such as surgery and sepsis, fasting, hypoglycemia, chronic malnutrition, high protein meals, drugs such as opioids, apomorphine, L-DOPA, alpha-adrenergic agonist, and ghrelin. Ghrelin is a 28 amino acid peptide produced by the gastric neuroendocrine cells and also by the hypothalamus, and stimulates growth hormone releasing hormone and also growth hormone by the hypothalamus and by the pituitary respectively. By the other hand, the stimuli that decrease growth hormone secretion are the following: glucocorticoids, hyperglycemia, obesity, high levels of free fatty acids, high levels of insulin-like growth factor 1, and hypothyroidism. Growth hormone excess or growth hormone oversecretion can produce gigantism, or acromegaly. Gigantism occurs due to high levels of growth hormone, but these high levels of growth hormone appears before the fusion of the growth plate, and the fusion normally occurs after puberty. Gigantism occurs with a height above average and usually starts around 13 years old. By the other hand, acromegaly also appears due to high levels of growth hormone. By these high levels of growth hormone appears after the fusion of the growth plate. Usually, acromegaly develops in patients between 30 and 50 years old. An acromegaly patient occurs with enlargement of hands, feet, and also with acromegalic face, with prognatism, and also with an increase in the size of the ears, the nose, the lips, and the tongue. Causes can be due to a pituitary adenoma, producer of growth hormone, or can also be due to a hypothalamic tumor that produces growth hormone releasing hormone, or even can be due to the ectopic production of growth hormone or growth hormone releasing hormone by lung or pancreatic tumors. Also, the tumor can compress near structures. For example, if compress the optic chiasm, the patient will develop bitemporal hemianopsia. If compress the subventricle, the patient will develop hydrocephalus. And also, you can see a patient with an increased intracranial pressure syndrome, characterized by headache, vomiting, papilledema, and bradycardia. This can produce also galactorrhea. You may see also galactorrhea in female patients due to compression of the infundibulum by the tumor, interrupting the transmission of dopamine above lactotrope cells. In this moment, you need to know that dopamine inhibits the production and secretion of prolactin by lactotrope cells, resulting in disinhibition of prolactin release and production by the pituitary gland. And also, galactorrhea can be due to a mixed tumor, producer of growth hormone and also prolactin. Growth hormone excess or growth hormone oversecretion. Laboratory tests. Laboratory tests are didactically divided in screening tests and confirmatory tests. As a screening test, we are going to use the measurement of the insulin-like growth factor 1, also known as somatomedin C. If it is high for age and sex, then we are going to do the confirmatory test. The confirmatory test that we are going to use is the oral glucose tolerance test with 75 grams of glucose. We are going to dilute these 75 grams of glucose in 300 ml of water. And then, of course, the patient will drink it. But before and after this, we are going to obtain blood samples for the measurement of growth hormone and glucose at baseline and also each 30 minutes during the next 2 hours. A normal answer is a value of growth hormone of less than 1 nanogram per ml in any sample. If growth hormone never decreases under 1 nanogram per ml, the patient has acromegaly. But let's take into account the following consideration to do a proper interpretation of the laboratory test in this area. If the insulin-like growth factor 1 or somatomedin C is normal, and growth hormone levels after the oral glucose tolerance test are less than 0.3 nanogram per ml, acromegaly is ruled out. If the insulin-like growth factor 1 or somatomedin C is high for age and sex, and growth hormone after the oral glucose tolerance test is not less than 1 nanogram per ml, then is more than 1 nanogram per ml, the patient has acromegaly. if the insulin-like growth factor 1 or somatomedin C is high, but the growth hormone after the oral glucose tolerance test is less than 1 nanogram per ml, then follow-up is recommended. Chemistry tests such as the fasting blood sugar will show hyperglycemia. Growth hormone deficiency. Growth hormone deficiency in children are usually due to an idiopathic cause, and in adults can be due to a pituitary adenoma that compress and destroy somatotrope cells. The diagnosis of growth hormone deficiency is made using growth hormone measurements after pharmacologic stimulation test. In fact, in the pediatric population, growth hormone deficiency is defined as a failure of growth hormone to reach defined levels after two different pharmacologic stimulation tests. As a screening test, and mainly in the pediatric population, we are going to use growth hormone measurements after performing physical exercises. A normal answer is a growth hormone value of more than 10 nanogram per ml in children, and a growth hormone of more than 5 nanogram per ml in adults. As confirmatory test, we are going to perform pharmacologic stimulation test, and we have the followings. We have the insulin tolerant test. The principle of the insulin tolerant test is that insulin increases the production and release of growth hormone releasing hormone by the hypothalamus. The insulin tolerant test is the gold standard for assessing, for diagnosing growth hormone deficiency, but is contraindicated in patients with history of seizures, cerebrovascular diseases, or cardiac disease. Failure of growth hormone to rise above 5 nanogram per ml in adults, and failure of growth hormone to rise above 10 nanogram per ml in children is considered abnormal. And in patients unable to undergo the insulin tolerant test, or in those one who needs a second confirmatory test, we can do the AYA9 stimulation test plus the growth hormone releasing hormone stimulation test. And a failure of growth hormone to rise above 4.1 nanogram per ml carries a sensitivity of 95% and a specificity of 91% of diagnosing growth hormone deficiency. We need to know also that the insulin-like growth factor 1 or somatomedin C is not sensitive enough to be used alone for the diagnosis of growth hormone deficiency. Other tests with high individual variability and not well studied are the following: the 24-hour or nighttime monitoring of growth hormone, the clonidine stimulation test. Here we need to know that clonidine inhibits somatostatin released by the hypothalamus, of course, and remember that somatostatin inhibits the production and secretion of growth hormone by the somatotrope cells. And we can use also the L-DOPA and the glucagon stimulation test. Now we are going to start to talk about prolactin. Prolactin is a peptide hormone encoded by genes located in the short arm of chromosome 6. Prolactin is produced by the lactotrope cells in the anterior pituitary gland. Prolactin secretion is normally kept at low levels by the inhibitory action of dopamine produced by the hypothalamus. Prolactin is secreted in a circadian fashion, with the highest levels during sleep and the lowest levels between 10 a.m. and noon. Prolactin has a serum half-life between 26 and 47 minutes, and it is measured by immunoassays. The reference values for serum prolactin for women is between 1 and 25 nanograms per ml, is the same, between 1 and 25 micrograms per liter. For men, between 1 to 20 nanograms per ml, or in general, between 80 and 500 milli-international units per liter. To perform the conversion from nanogram per ml to milli-international units per liter, you just have to multiply the value in nanograms per ml by 21.2, and you will obtain the results in milli-international units per liter. Prolactin acts on the hypothalamus and inhibits the secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. The inhibition of gonadotropin-releasing hormone results in a decrease in the release of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone by the anterior pituitary gland. And in females, this leads to a decrease in estrogen and progesterone, synthesis and secretion by the ovaries, leading to failure in ovarian follicular maturation, failure in ovulation. In males, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone deficiency causes a decrease in testicular synthesis of testosterone and stops spermatogenesis, producing in both sexes infertility. As we explained before, dopamine production by the hypothalamus inhibits the formation of prolactin by the lactotrope cells. But we need to take into account that also the hypothalamus produces thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH, and TRH stimulates prolactin production by the lactotrope cells. Now imagine that you have a patient with a primary or even a secondary hypothyroidism. In these patients with low thyroid hormones, with low T4 and low T3, and if the problem is primary, if the problem is secondary, the patient we have also a low thyroid stimulating hormone levels, a low TSH. This will lead to an increase of thyrotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus, and thyrotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus will increase the production and the secretion of prolactin by the lactotrope cells in the anterior pituitary, and prolactin can inhibit the production and the release of gonadotropin releasing hormones by the neurons in the hypothalamus, and this will affect the production and the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormones and luteinizing hormones by the gonadotrope cells in the anterior pituitary gland, leading to infertility. And as we saw previously, the cause of this infertility can be a hypothyroidism, primary or secondary. Continuing with the function of prolactin, we have to say that prolactin acts on breast tissue and stimulates lactation. During pregnancy occurs a progressive rise in serum prolactin, with levels reaching the 500 nanograms per ml by the third trimester, with an increase in the number of lactotrope cells and a doubling size increase of the pituitary gland. Prolactin can act also as a cytokine-like, regulating the immune system. When a patient is screened for hyperprolactinemia, 3 samples should be obtained, with intervals of 20 or 30 minutes among them. The samples can be analyzed separately and their results averaged, or alternatively, an equal aliquot from each sample can be pulled into one final sample that is then analyzed. By the other hand, hypoprolactinemia is very rare and is not associated with any specific medical problem, except for insufficient milk after giving birth or a reduced immune response or a reduced immune response to some infections. Hyperprolactinemia can produce galactorrhea in females, and galactorrhea refers to the spontaneous flow of milk from the breast not associated with nursing. Hyperprolactinemia can also produce amenorrhea in females, and in both sexes can lead to infertility and a decreased libido. Let's study now the different causes of hyperprolactinemia, and these ones are divided into physiologic, pharmacologic, and other causes. Among the physiologic stimuli that increase prolactin levels, we have stress, sleep, postprandially, pain, coitus, pregnancy, nursing, and nipple stimulation. Among the pharmacologic or among the medication that increase prolactin levels, we have opiates such as heroin, methadone, morphine, and apomorphine, estrogens and oral contraceptive, antihistamines, ACE2, such as cimetidine, ranitidine, antihypertensive, such as methyldopa, labetalol, reserpine, verapamil, and also TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone, can increase prolactin levels. In fact, thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulates prolactin secretion. Therefore, thyroid function tests are always indicated to rule out a hypothyroidism, primary or secondary, when a patient with hyperprolactinemia is evaluated. Other causes of hyperprolactinemia: systemic disorders such as hypothyroidism, primary or secondary, adrenal insufficiency, chronic renal failure, and cirrhosis. Tumors can lead also to hyperprolactinemia. For example, macroadenomas compressing the pituitary stalk, interrupting the transmission of dopamine to D2 receptors on lactotrophs cells and leading to disinhibition of prolactin secretion. And also hyperprolactinemia can be due to an ectopic production and secretion of prolactin by non-pituitary tumors. And also another cause is the polycystic ovarian disease. Now we are going to talk about Simon disease and Sheehan syndrome. In 1939, the German Medical Society recommended that anterior pituitary deficiency be called Simon disease, named after Maurice Simon, a German physician who in 1914 described a female patient with chronic pituitary failure. Nowadays, postpartum hypopituitarism is known as Sheehan syndrome, whereas all other pituitary failure are known as Simon disease. Hypofunction of the anterior pituitary gland can occur in both sexes, but is more prevalent in the female. The onset usually occurs in the postpubertal period and can be due to infarction or infections, tumors, neurosurgery, radiotherapy, or even an idiopathic disease affecting the pituitary gland. Sheehan syndrome is also known as ischemic necrosis postpartum. During pregnancy, pituitary gland increases twice its normal size, but this anatomical size increase does not go with an increase in the blood supply. And in case of bleeding during delivery or after, may appear necrosis of anterior pituitary gland. Posterior pituitary is less affected because it has a different arterial blood supply. Hypopituitarism is associated with secondary failure and complete loss of function of the thyroid gland due to low levels of thyroid stimulating hormone. Is also associated with loss of function of the adrenal glands due to low levels of adrenocorticotropic hormone, and also with loss of function of the gonads due to low levels of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. An hormonal replacement therapy should be undertaken and a dramatic improvement can be expected. Surgery may be needed in some cases, for example, when the cause is a tumor. Now we are going to talk about the empty cella syndrome. The empty cella syndrome refers to a condition in which the pituitary gland shrinks or becomes flattened and cannot be seen in the MRI. In fact, the area of the pituitary gland looks like an empty cella. The empty cella syndrome can be primary or secondary. Primary empty cella syndrome occurs when one of the layers, in this case the arachnoid, covering the outside of the brain bulges down into the cella and presses on the pituitary. It is associated with obesity and increase in intracranial pressure in women. Secondary empty cella syndrome occurs when the cella is empty because the pituitary gland has been damaged by a trauma, a tumor, neurosurgery, or radiation therapy. If there are symptoms, patient can have headaches, vision loss, or symptoms of hypopituitarism. In case of endocrine dysfunction, an hormonal replacement therapy should be undertaken, and surgery may be needed in some cases, for example, when the cause is a tumor. We are going to talk about posterior pituitary hormones. Oxytocin and vasopressin, also known as ADH, are the two major hormones of posterior pituitary. Are small oligopeptides, each composed of 9 amino acids, with a total mass of 1 kilodalton. Are synthesized in the bodies of the neurons in hypothalamus, transported through the axons, and stored in secretory granules in neurohypophysis. Oxytocin secretion is stimulated by stretching of the cervix and vagina during parturition. This is called Ferguson reflex. Oxytocin also promotes uterine contraction by direct action on the myometrium, and oxytocin also stimulates the myoepithelial cells surrounding the mammary glands and also lactiferous ducts to contract, resulting in milk ejection in response to suckling. Oxytocin measurements is very rare because it has a half-life between 3 to 5 minutes, being degraded by oxytocinase. By the other hand, ADH is synthesized within the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus, and its major function is to maintain water balance, increasing aquaporin channels in cortical collecting ducts on the kidney, increasing water reabsorption. To think in the pathology of posterior pituitary, it's the same that to talk about diabetes insipidus and also about the syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. That's why we are going to study now diabetes insipidus. Diabetes insipidus refers to a condition characterized by polyuria, or a urine volume of more than 2.5 to 3 liters per day. It's also characterized by a low urine osmolality thirst, and dehydration. Diabetes insipidus can be due to a lack of ADH or central diabetes insipidus due to tumors, trauma, neurosurgery, infarction or infection, psychogenic water intake, excess of vasopressinase during pregnancy. Vasopressinase is a placental enzyme that breaks down ADH. Or diabetes insipidus can be unresponsiveness to ADH, also called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, due to defects in B2 receptor for ADH, due to defects in the expression of aquaporin channels, due to chronic renal failure, amyloidosis, or even due to the use of some drugs such as demeclocycline. Laboratory diagnosis of diabetes insipidus include the water deprivation test. The test is used in patients with polyuria and low urine osmolality, in which the diagnosis of diabetes insipidus is being considered. Under medical supervision, patients are deprived of water and serial urine samples are collected. In normal subjects and in psychogenic polydipsia, urine osmolality rises progressively during water deprivation, arriving to 700 till 800 millismol per kilogram. In patients with diabetes insipidus, urine osmolality plateaus between 200 and 300 millismol per kilogram. The patient becomes thirsty and dehydration appears. If diabetes is central, urine osmolality increases after ADH is given, whereas in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, urine osmolality remains unchanged. Now we are going to talk about the syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. This syndrome is characterized by euvolemic hyponatremia with a decreased plasma osmolality. Although sometimes patients may be overhydrated, but not frankly edematous. Urine is inappropriately concentrated. The urine of these patients is very concentrated. Causes. The syndrome can be due to intracranial pathology, for example, hemorrhage, infarction, infections, meningitis, tumors, etc. Can be also due to drugs such as sulfonylureas, oxytocin, antidepressants, carbamazepine, vincristine. Can be also due to pulmonary pathology, for example, due to pneumonia, TB, due to bronchial carcinomas with ectopic production of ADH. Can be also due to cortisol deficiency, or can be even due to general causes such as trauma, pain, and surgery. All of them stimulates ADH release. Well, thank you for your attention. This is all for today.